Back. Are we all set? Okay. Okay, so I'm supposed to be talking about brains and love. That was the title we gave it. So I was thinking about it, and I was like, love, man, love is so awesome until it's not. You know, or love is like the best feeling in the world until it's the worst. Or, you know, love like feels eternal in the moment until you're filing for a divorce. You know, there's a lot in love that feels very contradictory. And so I was thinking about what are the enemies of love, and there's like 50 of them, right? But I'm just going to talk about 2 right now, and it's going to tie back into mindfulness. Enemy number 1, something called hedonic adaptation. Has anybody heard this term before? Psychological term?
I have to listen, yeah. Blink, blink.
Hedonic adaptation is a fancy term for getting used to stuff. Human beings are designed to get used to the good things and get used to the bad things. When you think about it, you know, it would have to be this way, otherwise we would go crazy. Unfortunately, what negative effect might this have on our long-term romantic relationships?
Complacency.
Complacency, taking each other for granted.
Boredom.
Boredom, that's right. Anything else? No, I'm just kidding. We'll stop there. Second psychological concept, something called negativity bias. This is somewhat better known. Has anybody ever heard this term before? Do you feel like you're in class? You're like all anxious. It's like, is he going to call on me? Negativity bias. That's actually what I just said was a good example of negativity bias. That is the natural, evolutionarily hardwired tendency to focus on threats. Right? And it's not hard to imagine why the human mind and most animal minds might be wired to notice threats. Because a threat can kill you, or at least make your life unpleasant, right? So we have this natural, necessary bias towards negativity. Now, how might this undermine your long-term romantic relationships?
No.
But just always assume.
The interactions that we pay attention to would often be the negative ones.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. There's this psychologist named Paul Gilbert who gives the example of, like, you know, you're going Christmas shopping and you go into 10 shops, and in 9 of those shops, you know, the clerks are incredibly helpful and, you know, and give you a pleasant shopping experience and you get what you want. And then in 1 shop, the clerk is rude. Well, when you go home to your spouse that night, who do you talk about? The rude one, that's right. And you get really mad and you obsess about it. Maybe you ruminate it. It comes back to you like days later. You all do this. I know you do. And you're like, oh, she was so rude. That's negativity bias at work, right? Now, in an intimate, romantic, long-term committed relationship, this tendency shows up. It shows up all the time. You know, you're in a relationship with a person, you share a mortgage, you are raising children together, and 9 out of 10 of your interactions are not only positive, but make your life better in ways that were probably inconceivable to you at an earlier point in your life. But then your spouse screws up, right? Or maybe your spouse has a problem, and you're going to start to focus on that problem. You're going to start to ruminate on that threat. Because, unlike other animals, we can carry threats around in our imaginations. I mean, all life is organized around the idea that you're moving towards pleasure and rewards, and you're moving away from threats and unpleasant things, right? The dog, Cody upstairs, thinks this way. You know, that's why he was like following us around when we had the chicken. You know, and then if we like threaten Cody or something like that, he goes running away, right? Well, we're the same way, right? We're no different from Cody in this regard. And, you know, and it can be this way in an intimate relationship, right? And, you know, and so if you're constantly focusing on threats, well, if you're doing what you're naturally wired to do, and you're focusing on threats, 2 things happen. So what's happening is that your attention is a spotlight, right? You have to think of your attention as being like this light in the middle of your head, and wherever it's pointed, that's what you see. That's what's illuminated, right? So when you shine a spotlight on something, what happens to everything outside of the spotlight?
Goes dark.
It goes dark, right? That's why you don't see the 9 helpful clerks in the stores. That's why you don't see the 9 helpful things your spouse did that day. You only see the 1 unhelpful thing that they did. So that's problem number 1 with negativity bias. Problem number 2 is that when you're focused on the threats, it triggers a stress response, right? It triggers that fight or flight response, which is not designed for annoying store clerks. It's not, the fight or flight response is not designed for noticing that your spouse did not do the dishes. That response is designed for escaping lion attacks. You're wandering along the savannah, you're minding your own business, and a lion jumps out. So your body is pumped full of neurotransmitters and this hormonal cocktail that is specifically designed to get you away from that threat, right? And your body is mobilizing resources that are only designed for short-term use, right? So that's how a zebra lives, you know, or that's how Cody lives a lot of the time. And once the threat goes away, Cody stops thinking about it. The zebra stops thinking about it. But we're human, and in addition to that animal brain, which is a part of who we are, we also have this human brain, the prefrontal cortex, these much newer parts of the brain. And that part remembers, and that part tells a story. And the story becomes part of who we are. And the story causes us anxiety. And it's really hard to let go of that anxiety. And if this anxiety becomes a part of your relationship, your romantic relationship, well, that becomes toxic, right? And I'm sure most of you here have experienced this. Everybody has. Nobody's immune to it. Which brings me to the solutions. So Aoi and I talked about me talking about mindfulness, right? I actually want to start with mindfulness and then go from there to like 3 other things that actually relate to mindfulness. Now, to me, a lot of people when they think of mindfulness think of meditation. Like you sit there and you've got your legs crossed and maybe you're sitting on a cushion if you're like a beginner, and if you're advanced you sit on a cliff, you know, overlooking the ocean or something like that, and you know, you count your breaths. But I never do that. Like almost never. To me, mindfulness is an approach to life. It's an approach that says that whatever experience I'm having, I'm going to try as much as possible to be present for that experience, to be focused on the present, and to non-judgmentally accept that experience. There is nothing I am experiencing that is good or bad, it's just an experience. And my goal, what will serve me, what will serve my survival and happiness, is to see that experience clearly. So, mindfulness, right? So, negativity bias and hedonic adaptation are things that happen very automatically. They're things that happen below subconscious awareness. One of the reasons we practice mindfulness is to correct for things that happen below subconscious awareness, to try to cultivate an awareness of our feelings and of our thoughts and of our surroundings. And if you can do that, then you can see it happening. You know, a lot of times, especially in intimate relationships, you know, you have a bad day at work, you come home, and what do? If your guard is down, if you're not being intentional, if you're not watching yourself, if you're not aware of your own awareness, and you come home and you've had a bad day, and there's 2 kids there, and one kid won't do his homework and he's crying, and the other kid is like playing with his DS and won't stop even though you've asked him to 20 times, and you know, and your spouse hasn't made dinner yet even though it was her turn. So what do?
Lash out.
Sure, that's one option. Right, that's like the natural thing. At the very minimum, you're going to be mad, and you're going to, and you may not lash out, but you're going to repress it, right? I do this all the time. I'm an expert. I should be giving a lecture about that. So what cultivating mindfulness is just cultivating that awareness. That's the dynamic. That's what's happening inside of you. And when you become aware of that, then you can start to control the spotlight of your attention. you can start to control that spotlight. So other things you can do to control that, which I actually think are sort of facets of a mindful way of living. One is gratitude, right? So, you know, hedonic adaptation is the enemy of gratitude, right? That is the thing that is the quality about us that makes the good things in life invisible. So what is gratitude? You know, actually, let me throw this out there. What is gratitude to you? Give me some answers. And if you, being thankful.
Appreciation.
Appreciation. It's like very simple sounding things, right? Well, the way gratitude is defined scientifically is that it's an affirmation of the good things in life. It's an affirmation of relationships. So if Aoi, you know, gives me a beer and the beer is good and I say thank you to her, I'm affirming that the beer is good, but I'm also affirming our relationship. I'm saying I recognize that there's interdependency between us and that you're important to me and you give me things that are good and that improve my life. However, here's where gratitude gets tricky. Gratitude is also an exercise in power in intimate relationships because you can withhold gratitude. And when you withhold gratitude, you're disaffirming the relationship. You're rejecting the good things implicitly. You might not mean to. None of this is intentional, right? That's the problem. It's not intentional. But you withhold it, right? So maybe one night, maybe the next night, your spouse does, in fact, have dinner ready on time, right? As per your agreement. And you don't say thank you because they didn't do it yesterday. So you're going to punish them a little bit by making them feel invisible, by making their contribution feel invisible, right? People do this all the time, every day, and there's nothing intentional about it. You're not thinking about it on the level of, I'm going to punish them. Some people do, right? They need therapy. But most people don't. They're just sort of doing it instinctively because you have this toolbox and you're just picking out tools without any sort of intentionality, right? So gratitude is it's the antidote to hedonic adaptation, but it's also a corrective to negativity bias, right? It's a way of making the good things visible. And it's cognitive. It's not, we think of gratitude as being a sort of very emotional experience, and it can be, but gratitude is also, it's also something you have to think through, which leads me to the next thing, which is compassion. So, you know, I was talking about that animal part of your brain, right? The part of your brain that's always running away from threats. So, and then there's the new part of the brain. Okay, so the animal part of your brain is not terrifically compassionate. Not because there's anything wrong with the animal part of your brain, not because there's anything wrong with animals, but it's not designed for that. It's designed for survival. It's designed for your own survival. The newer parts of the brain are designed for other people's survival. It's designed for human society. It's the social part, right? If you're focused on threats and you're not seeing the good things, it's very easy when you see somebody in distress to walk away from them. Because your brain will get a little bit confused. You'll confuse their distress with your distress. Is this clear, what I'm saying? You see a homeless person on the street, and you're not seeing necessarily the distress. What you're seeing is a threat, because you could be homeless. Maybe. Could be you. There, but for the grace of God, go you. Your spouse is in distress. Most of us will try to do something to comfort them. But if something has gone wrong in the relationship, it becomes much easier to walk away, to perceive their distress as being a threat to you. To override that requires effort and maybe not a little bit of courage. To see your spouse in distress and to think to yourself consciously, I need to do something to alleviate their suffering. And you can withhold that, right? As a power play. You can withhold it. You can say, you know, well, I was in distress and they didn't do anything for me, so I'm not going to do anything for them. Let them suffer, right? And maybe that's not without reason, but it's not going to make the relationship better, right? I mean, I really think in intimate relationships, the key to understanding compassion in intimate relationships is understanding that the job of the relationship is to provide a way of surviving over time. Like, it's all about the passage of time, which means aging, right? Long-term, committed, intimate relationships are about aging together. And because aging involves suffering, and you know, I'm sorry if this is news to some of you, but as we go through time, we suffer, right? It's inherent in human life because we have that awareness, because we have that new brain, that prefrontal cortex that actually can build clocks, and you know, that causes us to like check the time all the time, and we can see time going by. And we can see time going by in the faces of our long-term committed romantic partners. And that's a form of suffering, right? And you can turn away from that suffering, or you can go towards it and try to do something to alleviate it. Negativity bias gets in the way. And you can see that suffering as a threat if things are confused. It takes, to stop doing that, takes mindfulness. It takes being aware of your own fear of aging, in this case. There's other examples I could use, but I'll stick with that one. And to help this other person through it. And helping that other person, you're also helping yourself. So, next thing, forgiveness, and then I'll sort of stop and maybe we can talk. So, to go back to negativity bias, you know, your spouse does 9 things right and then does 1 thing wrong. And you ruminate on it, right? And that's natural. I do it. Everybody here has done it. So you can hold on to that forever in your imagination and create this story and make that story a part of who you are and a part of your relationship. Or you could forgive. You could say, I forgive you for that. Same thing for yourself, by the way. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I beat up on myself a lot if I screw up in my relationship, right? And again, you can turn that into a story about yourself and about the relationship. You can talk to yourself about what a screw up you are, right? Or you can forgive yourself. To me, the reason why forgiveness is so important is that it opens the possibility for change. You know, if you are willing to forgive somebody, if you're able to forgive them for a transgression, then you're creating the possibility for change. And you can also create that possibility for change within yourself by forgiving yourself. And if you can do that, then you open the door for making the relationship better over time, right? Now, at this point, in my work at the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, which is how he asked me to come here, people oftentimes will say, you know, yeah, but, you know, I was in this relationship and it was really abusive, or my spouse was bipolar, or you know, my husband had a gambling addiction, or, you know, she wouldn't stop cheating on me, something like that. Those are problems, right? Those are good reasons to end a relationship. The threats don't disappear. Negativity bias exists for a reason. It's not like there are no threats in the world. Positive thinking is not ignoring threats. Positive thinking is making sure that you count the good things. It's counting, right? Which is the essence of science, or at least the starting point for science. Science is counting. You know, you start by counting all of the good things in the world, as well as the bad things, right? the good thing, and it's a funny sort of contradiction, because you would think that we'd want to count the good things, but we actually, it's difficult. Depending on where you are in your life, it can take a lot of strength to do that. But if you can, it makes life better for you. And it will also make life better for your spouse. And that is all I have to say. Thank you.